All right, guys. Thank you for joining us at Square One Engineering's Lunch and Learn series. I'm your host, Trisha Ari, Senior Director of Operations here at Square One. Today, we have Dawn Fowler, Medical Device Labeling SME with 40 plus years of experience. She's an expert in global labeling, UDI implementation, and regulatory compliance, supporting companies such as Massimo, Edwards Life Sciences, Endologics, Baxter, and Allergan. She is passionate about advancing healthcare through effective labeling and regulatory compliance. Now, I'd like to turn this over to Ms. Dawn Fowler.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. I did want to let you know that yes, UDI and especially labeling is my passion. I have been doing it many, many years in both pharma, bio, and med device. And they each has their own unique challenges in a lot of ways. Some people have a tendency to simplify one versus the other, but when you move from space to space to space, you'll find that there's so much commonality about it. And that the requirements for all of them are pretty much in line. But kind of like the one thing that you can always count on is watch the pharma space. If something happens in the pharma space, more often than not, you're going to see, I mean, it could take a couple of years, could happen quickly, you're going to see the changes that are pretty similar happen within the med device and bio space. It's just that that's kind of how it flows. So that UDI is a really big example. Med device did not have UDI for a number of years, though pharma had the NDC numbers. And so definitely that's how they kind of flow. As you'll see, there's an ebb and flow of all the information that comes forward. There have been a lot of positives and negatives about labeling and UDI that have come through in most of the countries. One of the things you're going to see as we go forward is more and more countries are going to try to assert their how do we say, not dominance, but they want to assert their information on the industry. They want to make sure that when you're building product, you're going to build it to their requirements. We've seen, EU has done that, FDA has done that, China, which are the big ones, but now you're seeing smaller and smaller countries like Malaysia, Saudi. So just be aware of that this is still going to evolve. It's not going to stop at any point in time. But just so you know, from the thing that's really big within industry has been UDI. UDI has definitely made a huge impact on product labeling, and both on the physical side of putting the labels on with the UDI mark, as well as the database and data information that comes forward. So, but we have had some real good wins as we've gone forward. We're getting a huge adoption of barcoding all throughout industry. It's happening all the way from manufacturing through distribution and all the way down to the customer in a lot of cases, but especially in the healthcare setting. Hospitals and clinics are using barcoded bracelets on a patient, and then comparing that or scanning that to the product that's used, matching it together to make sure right product to the right patient, which is huge. And now we've never seen that in many, many years. And the other thing that it's happening with it is you as a patient get the positive understanding that when you go into the hospital and say you have an ankle sprain, you're not getting billed for a neck brace because of the fact that the UDI that's on the wrap that goes on your ankle is different from the UDI that goes on a neck brace. So when they scan that, you're going to be billed properly, and the whole accounting process goes a lot faster and you have more accuracy throughout the whole process. And lastly, as part of that, is that what is happening is you're finding large groups are data mining this, especially Mayo, Cleveland Clinic, Department of Justice. They are definitely data mining all of this to make sure that they can track and trace and find out what is the best products for their customers, both price-wise as well as effectivity-wise. So just know that this data is being used all over the world for a number of different things, and that's why it is so important. Also, too, one thing from a labeling perspective, you're going to have challenges that's coming forward is that expanding the use of barcodes. The original intent was one barcode with all the information, and that was it. But now that you have marketing information coming forward and things like that, there is a expanded use of QR codes. In some cases, GS1 and others are trying to build a hybrid code that everything can go into, that it can take you into the device information for, say, EUDAMED or Good ID, but also then sideways into the product information or product portfolio within the company of the information that you need to use there. So they're kind of using it as marketing. So more and more codes are coming, which means more and more space challenges on labeling as you go forward. And I will take a 2-second touch on, there is a group that is looking at doing electronic labeling. And it's still in its infancy, but they just had a huge meeting about it. And they are looking to take it to where you will be able to scan the product and not have all of these languages and all this information except for critical information on it, scan it, and then go into a database that will give you everything you know, to try and help simplify labeling, because of the fact that it's just getting too big and companies are struggling with multiple languages and multiple pieces of unique information that has to go on those labels. And then again, more, like I said here, more databases are coming. I mean, we know EUDAMED is here, but the next one's coming is SwissDomed, which is Switzerland. So those are coming. Okay. So current developments are, of course, we know the EU, big thing going on. Barcodes on product and packaging have to be done by next year in May. The EUDAMED module became mandatory. There was a long-term process that the EU had put in saying it was going to be bundled with all the other modules. Finally, they realized that some modules are finished faster than others, and they needed to get those up and running. So they went to Parliament and they split that out. And there was a regulation that was set forth about a year ago to say that the EUDI module will now have separate dates. So these are the dates. May 28th is the date that we needed to have everything started on for everything that we're going forward. And November 28th is what we're going to need to have in place for legacy devices. So anything you launch after May 28th, any new product you have must be in the EUDAMED database before you can launch the product. Legacies, November 28th. So it's a lot of work going forward of letting people know how to get this done. And the EUDAMED system is somewhat complex. There's some ambiguity about some of the fields that they ask for. So if you need help, go to your notified body and ask. They will be able to help you to clearly understand what that field is requiring so that you don't get in trouble. But EUDAMED has said that they're going to give a lot of grace going forward for this these places where there could be confusion, and they will be doing what FDA did when Good ID came into place and auditing it and going back and asking you to amend the information to the right way that they want to see it presented. And of course, labeling is coming. The big one is EC to EU rep. There's lots of changes coming for that. Okay. So to get talking about United Kingdom, which is another big one that's been up and coming and evolving because since they stepped away from the EU, there is marking that should be placed on your product. However, understand the CE mark can be used until July 1st, 2030. And they're saying that's under transitional arrangements because they're still trying to flesh all that out, how they're going to do it, what they're going to do. So if there isn't anything concrete coming forward yet, but you do have a number of years left, at least three years plus to 4 years, to be able to operate under the CE mark. And if they don't have anything in place by then, you can be sure they're going to extend that. They do not want to impact the supply chain. And that's been a big key for them. That's why they keep expanding the deadlines for this, is because they don't want negative impact to supply chain. But they do have newly amended labeling and UDI requirements. You need to go out and read those. You need to go out and get the document and from the UK government and take a look at it, because it also includes digital documentation systems for EIFUs and implant cards and how they want to see those presented. So there's a lot of detail in that. That's why I couldn't cover it here, but I wanted to make a point of you need to go look at those to make sure how it's going to impact your company and your labeling processes. The other thing they are going to do is introduce their own end-to-end UDI infrastructure. They do have in place right now for the National Health Service what they call Scan for Safety, which is where UDI is required. The interesting thing is that you can't place a product into a hospital unless you have UDI, because the government owns all the healthcare there. So they have mandated Scan for Safety with UDI. It's kind of like they basically told you have to do it for that. But that's more manufacturing distribution driven. This is going to focus on UDI infrastructure in basically the same way you see EUDAMED and the Good ID data. Also, just to touch on, we have Switzerland. Device registration in SwissDomed, which is the equivalent of EUDAMED, will be mandatory on July 1st. with a transition period until December 31st. Okay, so Switzerland is now starting to exert their authority over how they want to see information come into their systems to be able to utilize them. They've been on the fence about this for a number of years, kind of trying to figure out the dates, but these are now the concrete dates of when you need to have data into their systems. And then this also goes hand in hand with having the Swiss mark on labeling. The UAE they're trying to get their UDI process started. They're following the European framework. So we expect to see that it's going to be looking pretty much the same. No changes to where barcoding is going to be put onto products, and no changes to, we don't think, to any of the labeling requirements other than what they're already accepting now. There could be a twist in that, and they may say something, but as we're talking with them, it seems to be going on track. Australia. Okay, Australia is interesting in that Australia TGA in specific, they have been working a long time to get a UDI system up, and that for years they were working on giving us a sandbox to play in for the data side of it. They accepted barcodes with either HIPAA or GS1, the way that everyone else was, as long as you're following the rules for those two different types of barcodes. And then they do have a document out complying with the UDI timeframes, which was published in May this year, which does have updates to it. So I suggest that you go and read that if you're involved with UDI, both on the labeling as well as in the database. But again, for them, they're giving us a long grace period that all devices have to become compliant by July 2030, unless you have exemptions. But take a look at that, because it is, like everything else, a risk-based timetable. 2030 is the end date, but you may have an earlier compliance date based on risk. China always presents problems. You know, China is challenging, as we say. They just updated their rules for unique identification system for medical devices. They have a sliding scale of dates that they require the UDI to be on the product, as well as for their database. Their database is proprietary. You have to use someone local to be able to get information in Chinese. China, the government owns that system, and they don't open it up like you would find. You can log into EUDAMED, you can log into Good ID, not with the Chinese system. So you have to generally have somebody in country or someone outside who has access to get in there to get into it. Then you pay to get into this system and have it on your computer or whatever to be able to put that information in. But these are the dates that they're giving, that they're putting in for UDI must be on the product, as well as what they're finding for the databases. So you have June 2027 is coming up, and then class 1, which will be the big one for most companies, 2029. So that gives you some time. But understand, yeah, China has unique labeling requirements, requiring registration numbers, the Chinese language, those kinds of things. But those have been in place for a long time. These are now the new requirements that are coming through. But again, review those and make sure that you have no issues with being compliant with it. I know a lot of companies, the companies that I've worked at in the past, that we have dealt with China with these, we definitely do use a third party to do this work for two reasons. One is because having someone in country with the system, understanding it in Chinese is simpler, much simpler. But secondly, is we don't want them in our systems. We don't want them to reverse engineer or hack back into the systems. We're talking about building separate firewalls and everything else to keep the Chinese government out of our medical device systems. And so this makes it easier, because you don't have to work with your IT group to put in place all of these security protocols to be able to make sure that China isn't getting into your system and looking at your devices and reverse engineering them. At the same time, you can keep your systems clean, absolutely clean, which is huge for China. Brazil and Visa, our friends at Anvisa, they've always been really good about the information they give forward. They are very forthcoming about telling us what they want to do and how they want to do it. So they put in 2021, they put in a requirement on what they're looking for based on risk class to have the UDI on the product as well as in the database. And again, no labeling changes were effective based on this. This was strictly adding UDI because they want the traceability in there. Since then, NVSA has come out with a couple of small changes in labeling, but nothing that has been too major at all, nothing that has been too proprietary. So they've been pretty easy for us. It's the UDI portion that has been challenging to get all of this on because of the fact of what they're looking for. What we're finding with most of these countries is that because, other than the UK, because of what they're doing with having Brexit and others, we're finding that most of them are focusing on UDI right now, a lot. And also understanding when you look at Europe that the EC to EU rep was coming. So they understood big changes that cost a lot to these companies are coming. And so they kind of reduced the amount of labeling changes to make it more specific for their country or their region, to enable all of these other big initiatives to be completed first. What I will tell you is that once these are all completed, do not be surprised that then you start to see reviews of the labeling requirements, like India and others who are doing that where they're going to go in and put things in place to make their labels a little more specific to their market, and may make it difficult for you in the end because we will not have harmonization. Harmonization is a dream between all the labels that we have. There's no way you can fit 27 languages on a label really, unless you do a lot of creative solutions. And so understanding that this makes it, how do I say it, makes it more, it's going to become more standard to have a generic label that can go to the big markets and then maybe a space to do postponement, where you're going to put on specific information onto that label, and have a process to do that, usually at the end of the line, maybe in distribution or something like that, because the fact that they are going to continue to get much more specific as we go forward. And more coming. That's why I said there are more to come. There are a lot of other smaller countries that I didn't even touch on here, that are looking at doing these things. Like I mentioned earlier, Malaysia, India, they are looking to do things that will incorporate UDI or incorporate labeling changes. I mean, India specifically has put in place a couple years ago, and I know it's difficult, as pricing. And you have to have that pricing information on the product before it gets to customs. So and they change their prices twice a year. So if you're marketing in India, that becomes really challenging, that you have to constantly keep updating your labeling or figuring out ways to make it simple to update your labeling to get that information on there before it gets to customs, because customs will check against the current pricing structure before they will let the product in the door. So these are some of the things you have to be very aware of that are forthcoming, is pricing and unique registration numbers being placed on products, things like that, that make it very, very uniquely for a country, unique for a country to have specificity that of what the things they want on their labels, because they're looking at it as their label, not a global label. Okay, so here's the one that is basically the current big issue, challenge, project that's going to happen to all companies, is the EC to EU rep symbol change. Okay, this has been rumored and has been ruminating throughout industry for about the past year and a half, 2 years. There has been a group that has worked on this and has basically published this. We got some early information in the fall that this was now pretty much finalized, and we just had to wait for publication. That was the thing, is this was submitted, we were able to read it, it sat there while it was going through publication, as it had to be ratified by all the countries in the EU before it became a regulation. So the symbol change is what they call editorial. So it means no impact on health, safety, performance. So they were able to give us a very long timeline for implementation on this because of that, since there wasn't something that had to be acted upon immediately. So what happened is you don't need to get a prior approval from your notified body for this label change. You can start at any time. At this point, you couldn't start earlier than the date that this was published on June 17th, because if product got into the market that had it on there, it was still not approved and they would have pulled your product. So now, as of June 17th, you can start making this change. The cool part of this, that I'm going to tell you, I was so excited about, is you can intermix. There is not that you do not have to take a product structure of, say, a Tyvek tray that goes into a carton with an IFU, and have to make sure they all are similar, that they all have the EU rep on all three. You can intermix. The Tyvek tray can have an EC rep, the IFU can have an EU rep, the carton can have an EC rep, because they understand that based on procurement, and this is going to place a really big burden on all of our packaging manufacturers to make these changes, unless you're doing it electronically on the fly, especially IFUs, if you're doing paper IFUs, cartons, those kind of things, it is going to place a burden on them to be able to satisfy the needs of all of their customers. So that's why they said you can intermix, so that you can time this as you go forward with your project, to say that, you know, we have to burn out all of these old labels or old Tyvek, and it's going to take us 2 years to do it, and we're going to burn that out. In the meantime, we can go ahead and start placing this on the label, because the label is an electronically generated label. So this gives you a lot of flexibility. However, the caveat to that is that you have to make sure by June 2031, it is done. And anything flowing into the EU must have coordinated on the product the EU rep symbol at every level. Okay, that's going to be the key, is you've got till 2031, and people are like, oh, that's 5 years, we have a long time. When you have a lot of SKUs and a lot of different levels of packaging, no, it isn't that long. It's going to take a lot to coordinate that. This is going to have to be for some companies that have big, big portfolios, say a J&J, a Medtronic, and Edwards, and you're talking, 2,500 SKUs, or if you're talking about like J&J, 23,000 SKUs. This is going to take a lot to put this project together, treat it as a project, and be able to prioritize it throughout the business, communicate it throughout the business that this has got to be done. Okay. But the other thing is that if you have a product, say a medical device, that you have placed the EC rep symbol on, and say this is a device that has a 5, 10, 15-year shelf life, such as an MRI machine, or say a heart monitor, it's a hard product that has a plate on the back, or whatever, that has that EC rep symbol on it. As long as it's placed on the market prior to June 2031, it can continue to be made available with the intermix or just EC rep symbol if you need to burn out some inventory until it expires. Once it expires, or it's depleted. Now, what they mean by expires is every product has an expiration date. I mean, some could be 15, 20 years as if it's a big machine or things like that. So you're going to have to account for those in your project to make sure they're tracked. But the beauty of it is you don't have to have your sales force going out and over labeling product in the field at all with this, until the time comes that you think that maybe this product needs to be done, if it's like a hard machine or something like that. But otherwise you can leave it. You don't have to do that at all. So I think the team who built this was very reasonable for labeling within industry. I think they really, really tried hard to make it. It's going to be a burden, but it's not going to be so burdensome that it's not going to impact the day-to-day manufacturing operations as bad as we had thought it would, because this is massive. I mean, this is on everything. So that's why. And understand the new ISO 15223 was published as well on June 17th. So please take a look at that, because then the symbol is in there and how to use it. Make sure that you cite that in your documents, because this is the newest version. And so make sure that if you have an audit or things like that, that you are marching towards that document and not the 2021 version, that you're still maintaining that as you transition, but you're looking at the new 2026 document. Okay. So, and this I wanted to touch on really quick. This is an awareness topic. I don't know, because a lot of folks who deal with labeling are not quite aware that this has been going on for a number of years, is human factors. It's more targeted in a lot of cases towards regulatory. All of the documents and all of the publications that come out, things like that, are targeted towards the regulatory side and engineering side. But it affects labeling, okay? In the earlier release of the human factors documentation, there was a discussion, a couple paragraphs in there about labeling. And the labeling is based on the fact of understanding and placing within an IFU, or on the label if it's something that is of concern, how to use the product while incorporating human factors. And human factors is basically making sure that you build this product in such a way that it works easy enough for, say, the person who is deploying the product or the doctor or whatever, that they're not going to get, let's say if you have a guide wire or catheter, that they're not going to get repetitive stress injuries like on their fingers from having to use a gun to do it, because it's been engineered in such a way that it does less impact, and you can justify why it's got less impact on a hand. Otherwise, you would have to use a human factors warning within your IFU. These are the kind of things that the engineering has to look at as they design and build a product, of how it's going to affect the people who use it. And that's what the human factors is mostly focused on. Or if there is, especially like home healthcare, things like that, you've got to make sure from a human factor standpoint that they are easy to use, understandable, that type of thing. So if you're doing a product that is both sold through professional use and also home healthcare use, you need to make sure that you have that coordinated on the information that's going out, so that it makes it very clear to the home healthcare person how this product is used and used safely and efficiently. How do I say, the efficacy of it works. Same for the professional side. Okay. So it is considered. You have to look at this as you develop your IFUs. It's something that FDA has now, like we said, published in May, another publication on it, talking about it, and especially about submissions. So when you develop your labeling, you submit your labeling, this is something they're going to consider. And you really need to be cognizant of that, because you don't want to see it get returned based on the fact that the IFU does not reflect current standards on human factors. Okay. Just something that, like I said, it's an awareness topic, because it is becoming a topic within the FDA. Okay. So understanding this, labeling and UDI are constantly changing, and we know that. And business just wants to keep marching forward and do what they want to do, make their product. We constantly, as working with labeling, we're constantly having to disrupt that business, because every time there's changes, every time there's a new country that has requirements that is unique to them, that you have to build a new SKU or a new subset of, that becomes a problem to them. I mean, you think about it, you have new bills of materials, you have to manage distribution. There is a huge chain of areas that are impacted with a labeling change. It's funny. I have I teach a class on this at USC, and I have a 3-page 11x17 PowerPoint presentation, a huge one, showing each and every step of what you have to go through to get a label produced, as well as developed and put on the product and into the customer's hand. And then also taking into account electronic uses, things if you have to put, say, a stick into a medical device, a machine that needs to have information on either a stick or something like that, that will be able to give them information on what they're doing. But the thing is that understand that when you start at the beginning, the best thing to do is to understand your products from cradle to grave, because you'll understand where your impact is doing labeling and where you can see the pitfalls that are going to happen and their potential, and head off potential problems. Because in fact, you need to make sure that all these people, would say the ECU rep process, are involved, because this is going to be a multi-year project, depending on the amount of SKUs you have, it could be, that is going to continually affect them and also impact their day-to-day requirements. So this is something that needs to be really, really well communicated. So how can you look at to manage this? And we've kind of, like I say here, reduce the impact. So let's take a look at that. Look at it strategically. This is the biggest thing. Create scope, create a project out of it, and really communicate to people that you don't want scope creep. Scope creep can be a big problem, where people are like, oh, you're just changing that, let me just change this at the same time. Anyone who's worked in labeling can totally understand that, because it happens all the time. But you need to focus and get this done. You have a deadline, and you don't want to find in 2031 that you still haven't completed all the products and you to be manufactured, because you've now made your project not just EC to EU, it's now EC to EU plus this, plus that, plus the other thing. So that's really, really key. And look at how many SKUs you're changing. Use project management tools and their process. It's so important because of the fact that there's so many moving parts. Like I said, so many departments are affected that if you don't understand what you affect down the line by making this change, then you can make a mistake and really affect what's down the line and have to have either a recall or the product isn't working or the labels are wrong or something happens to where it totally disrupts the whole process. And you want to make sure you do it right the first time. That's the key. Leverage your subject matter experts is huge. Supply chain, distribution, your engineering, your quality, regulatory. And one of the key factors that is always overlooked is your quality documentation teams. They're going to be having to process all of these change requests. That's a lot because you're going to have to put them through on change orders. And then, of course, the approvers, unless you build a special process of 1/1, because this is a very if you keep your scope creep out and you focus on this as a single change, you can, in essence, in a lot of cases, just do a 1/1 and expedite getting your documentation through. But still, documentation takes a lot. They have to be reviewed. The documents have to be signed off. They have to be put into the system. They have to be released, all of that kind of thing. So that's where you have to make sure you include documentation. They're highly overlooked, but they're highly critical to making this a success. So please be aware of that. Look at your potential issues. By getting them early, you can try to put solutions in place. Use your SMEs. Ask them, where do you see there's going to be communication? Where do you think there's going to be pitfalls? Where do you think we're going to have problems? And take care of that ahead of time and build it into your project. Plus also build in, time, extra time into your project, because that's going to be important. And communicate. The one thing I can't say enough is communicating up, down, sideways, below. Communicate all the way. Your manufacturing people need to know. Distribution needs to know. Your execs, your C-suite needs to know. This is a huge impact and it's going to be costly to the company because you do have 5 years to burn out a lot of packaging. But at the same time, if the person who in your supply chain bought a slow mover and bought 5 years worth of packaging and it's sitting in your inventory, you're going to end up having to spoil stuff. So you're going to have the negative side of it where you're going to have spoilage and it's going to cost. So you have to be really careful about how you manage that. And you may want to do your high runners first, ones where you can look at combining that they have a common, say, Tyvek or a common label throughout a whole number of products and do those to get those out first. There's a lot of ways to approach it. And what works best for your company and your systems and processes is the best way to do it. But just realize that there may be alternative methods out there of how to do this and be able to leverage those and utilize those. So lastly, how can you help this in the future? I want to tell you, let's go to the next slide. Basically, how to participate. This was a big process with EC to EU rep. There were a lot of people involved in it, and there were a lot of people where they pulled for opinions and for questions. I know somebody who's on the ISO team who asked questions, came to conferences and said, "Hey, what do you think about what we're doing with this? What do you think is the approach?" And we were all like 5 years. And they took that in, and I've seen that happen with countries. The Saudi representatives came to a conference I was at a couple of years ago when they were shaping their UDI program and said, "What do you think is the best one out there? What do you see that we could do better or that we could do that wouldn't be so burdensome on you?" And they took those to heart, and the Saudi D software has that incorporated because they listen. And so you need to be out there advocating for your company. You really do. Join AdvaMed, join EUDAMED. There's so many medical device and pharmaceutical organizations out there that can help you to understand what's going on in the global landscape. So please join groups. A great one is GS1. GS1 has a public policy group. So if you're using GS1 barcodes on your products, you can go in there, you can log in and get access to it. And they have a whole world view of all of the things that are up and coming for UDI particularly, but also labeling changes that you can participate in, you can ask questions. They go out and advocate for the companies that belong to GS1 as well with the different government entities. You can be part of that if you want, or you can make your voice heard. So it does a lot of that. The other thing is seeking information. Personally, what I do is every day, I spend 30 minutes data mining. I have a specific list of different websites I go to, Emergo, UL, and others, BSI. different country ones that I go to. I go to JPL for Japan. I go to different ones that are out there in VSET and look to see if there's anything new and just try to find any initiatives that are kind of percolating for labeling and UDI. And that's where I come back and then I can go do deep dive and get myself educated. Also, too, a lot of larger companies use what we call aggregators. SAI Global is one. There's other ones out there. You can get in touch with the group in your company that uses them and ask them to feed you the information, because it's a push every day from the aggregators. It's not, you don't have to go out and pull. And that's really helpful because you get like a quick little snapshot newsletter that says, well, this is going on here, this is going on there. And then it will lead you to do the deep dive that you want to on those areas that are going to affect you or your company. So you need to go out and actually, in most cases, you need to seek. Like I said, the websites that I go to, I just go in and check every day and do a quick search for the word labeling or UDI, and it'll come back if there's new things going on. But then if you use an aggregator, you can get it as a push, which is awesome, because then you get a nice synopsis that will help you understand what's coming forward. But I can't say enough about being out there, working on these groups, being part of these decisions that are being made globally, and having you advocate for your company to try and steer it or kind of move it in the direction that is going to benefit your company most. It's worked very well with AdvaMed and EUDAMED. I've been on those groups for years. And so I can't tell you how important this is. But personally, what I will tell you is doing this is very strategic. Very strategic. It's perceived that way, and it is because of what you're doing for your company. And for you as a personal growth, you can make this known to the people in your company of what you're doing. And that gives you a lot of perception, people understanding that you're trying to do what you can for the company, being very forward thinking, being very strategic, and affecting how these changes are going to be made. And so you can't even begin to understand how much goodwill that buys you with especially your C-suite and your manager and others, because of the fact that you're thinking out of the box. And a lot of people don't. A lot of people just do their day-to-day job, but you're trying to go out there and see what's out there that's going to affect us so I can help my company. So I just want to say, on a personal note, that is really, really a big thing for your career growth, is doing that, is understanding that landscape, and being able to articulate that as well, of how I go and do this, where I go and do that. Not only for the job you have, but anything future you do, you can talk about how you've built those relationships, the peer-to-peer relationships, and the networking. And I will tell you, networking is huge. Networking is huge. Go to conferences, go to webinars, those kind of things. If you can do it in person, that's even better. You can't believe the relationships you can build with a peer-to-peer network to where you can get this information. I can also tell you about the EC to EU rep information. I built a relationship a long time ago with a friend who works for another company, a competitor, mind you, who is on the ISO team. And I ping him for information all the time. He comes and asks me information about labeling systems and things. I ping him. That's what I would get information that was coming down the forefront a little bit ahead, so I could plan a little better with the team and plan for the company, because I knew what was going on, because peers have given me information. If I have any problems with a question of something, I can go to a colleague I have in Medtronic, a colleague I have in J&J, and ask them questions about things. Tania is great at Medtronic, and I work with her and say, hey, what do you see about this? Or I heard this is coming. What do you think? So you can build a lot of information around your peer network as well. Very important. I can't say enough about that, and going out and getting this shaping, trying to shape your company's forward progress in labeling by understanding what's coming down the global landscape.